I thought I was just fixing a broken door, but the way her mom's friend kept me company that afternoon changed everything. When I showed up at the house that afternoon, I honestly thought it would be routine. Tighten the hinges, oil the latch, maybe sand down the frame a little. The back door had been sticking for weeks, and her mom had asked me to take a look. Nothing complicated, nothing unusual. But when the door opened, it wasn't her mom standing there. It was her mom's closest friend. She was in her early 40s, dressed simply in a soft blouse and jeans, but there was something about the way she carried herself, that easy poise, the way her eyes softened as they landed on me. She smiled with this amused little curve of her lips, as if she already knew I was caught off guard. "Oh, you're here to fix the door?" she said, her voice low, smooth, and touched with warmth. "She's not home right now, but don't worry. I'll keep you busy." The way she said it wasn't flirty in the obvious sense, but playful, carrying just enough suggestion to unsettle me. I laughed it off, stepping inside, but I couldn't help noticing the faint trace of her perfume in the hallway, subtle, floral, and a little intoxicating. She moved with a kind of quiet confidence as she led me toward the back of the house. Her steps were unhurried, her posture relaxed, and yet every gesture felt deliberate. When she reached for the light switch in the narrow corridor, her hand brushed against my arm, light as a whisper, but enough to make me suddenly aware of the closeness between us. I told myself it was nothing. Just an accident. But the warmth of her skin lingered against mine longer than it should have. The door itself was stubborn, the wood swollen slightly from summer humidity. I knelt down to test the frame, running my fingers along the uneven edge, trying to focus on the work. But my attention kept drifting, not just to the problem in front of me, but to the quiet presence standing behind me. I could sense her there, leaning casually against the wall, watching. It wasn't the kind of watching that made you self-conscious. It was gentler than that, a calm curiosity, like she enjoyed seeing someone absorbed in their task. Every now and then she made a small comment, light and teasing, as though to remind me she was still there. I tried to answer casually, but there was a pull in the air I couldn't quite name. Something about the stillness of the house, the faint sound of her breathing when the room went quiet, the subtle warmth that seemed to radiate from where she stood. By the time I reached for my tools, I realized I was already distracted. Not by the door, but by the woman who had promised to keep me busy. And the truth was, she already was. I settled into the work, trying to convince myself the task at hand deserved all my attention. The screwdriver turned in my palm, the faint scrape of metal against the hinge filling the silence. But no matter how much I tried to focus, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was still there. She hadn't left the room. Instead, she lingered just a few steps away, leaning against the wall with one arm folded over the other, as though she had all the time in the world. I could feel her gaze resting on me, not heavy, not intrusive, but steady enough that it carried its own kind of weight. Every so often, I'd glance up from the doorframe and find her watching. And each time, she didn't look away. She just held my eyes for a second longer than what most people would consider polite, then smiled faintly, as if she enjoyed seeing me lose my rhythm. I dropped a screw once, a small, clumsy mistake. It clinked against the wooden floor, rolling just far enough that I had to reach awkwardly to catch it. She chuckled softly, the sound warm and low, and said, "Careful. I'd hate for you to break more than just the door." Her voice carried that same teasing undertone, playful but measured, as if she wanted to see how much I could handle. I felt heat rise faintly to my face, though I kept my head down, tightening the screw as though that could anchor me. She moved then, pacing slowly across the room. The click of her heels against the floorboards echoed in the quiet space, steady and rhythmic, a reminder of her presence even when I didn't look up. I heard the gentle rustle of fabric as she shifted her posture, leaning near the window before crossing back toward the doorway. At one point, she offered me a glass of water. She set it on the nearby counter, her hand brushing the edge of the glass as though inviting me to notice the small gesture. "You should stay hydrated," she said lightly. "You look like you take your work seriously." I murmured a thanks, though my throat felt drier than before. When I reached for the glass, I caught the subtle warmth in her eyes, not obvious, not overbearing, but quietly present, like a secret she wasn't planning to confess just yet. The air between us seemed charged with something unspoken. The house was quiet, save for the sound of tools in my hands and the occasional creak of the floor when she shifted her weight. But beneath that quiet was a tension, not uncomfortable, not unwelcome, but undeniable. I told myself I was imagining it. That she was simply being polite, keeping me company. Yet every time her gaze lingered, every time her presence hovered just close enough to brush against my awareness, I felt the truth pressing in. The door wasn't the only thing unsteady in that room. And I was beginning to realize, either was I. I just managed to loosen the stubborn hinge, the metal finally giving way under steady pressure, when I heard her footsteps approach. This time she didn't stop a few feet away. Instead, she crouched down beside me, her presence suddenly close enough that I felt the warmth of her body radiating into the narrow space we shared. "I don't know much about fixing doors," she said softly, her tone half teasing, half curious. "But I feel like I should at least look like I'm helping." Before I could respond, she reached out and pressed her hand lightly against the frame, steadying it as though her touch could actually make a difference. Her fingers brushed over mine, brief but deliberate, and in that fleeting contact I felt something spark, subtle, electric, enough to pull me out of rhythm. I froze for a moment, the screwdriver suspended mid-turn. Her laughter came gently, low in her throat, carrying no malice, just amusement at how easily she'd unsettled me. "Don't worry," she added, her hand still resting against the wood near mine. "You're doing fine." Her hair slipped forward as she leaned in a little closer, a soft strand brushing against my arm. The faint tickle of it against my skin sent a ripple through me, sharper than I expected. I caught the scent of her perfume again, warmer now, blended with the subtle trace of her shampoo, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air heavier. I cleared my throat, trying to focus on the hinge, but her nearness made it almost impossible. She wasn't even touching me anymore, yet every part of me remained aware of her, the steady curve of her shoulder, the way her hand lingered just a few inches from mine, the warmth of her breath as she leaned to glance at what I was doing. "You're really good at this," she said, her voice quieter now, almost intimate. "I can tell you take care with things, not just rushing to get them done." It was a simple comment, but the way she said it, like it meant more than fixing a door, made me pause. I turned slightly to look at her, and for a brief second, our faces were closer than they had any reason to be. Her eyes met mine, steady and calm, yet carrying something underneath. Something she wasn't saying out loud. I pulled my gaze back to the hinge, my chest tightening with the effort of pretending nothing had shifted. My hand moved again, turning the screwdriver, but I felt the lingering ghost of her touch across my skin as if it were still there. The door creaked as I tested the hinge, a sharp reminder of why I was there. But her presence beside me, her laughter, the gentle brush of her fingers, that was what stayed. And in that quiet moment, kneeling side by side, I began to wonder if fixing the door wasn't the only thing she intended for me to do that day. By the time I had tightened the last screw, the door was moving smoothly, no more resistance when I pushed it open and closed. I wiped the edge of my hand across my forehead, satisfied at the small but solid victory. She stepped closer then, testing the door herself. Her palm pressed lightly against the wood as she swung it open, then shut, nodding in quiet approval. "You've saved us all from endless frustration," she said with a playful smile. "I don't know how you do it. I can never get things like this to work." Her words barely registered, because in that moment I became intensely aware of her proximity. She was standing directly behind me, so close that I could feel the faint brush of her sleeve against my shoulder. The space between us seemed to dissolve, and with it, my ability to pretend I wasn't affected. When I turned slightly to face her, our closeness startled me. Her face was only inches away from mine, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the soft glow of her skin and the afternoon light streaming through the window. Her breath, warm and steady, brushed against my cheek, and for a second the world went very still. Neither of us moved. Her hand, still resting against the doorframe, drifted just a little lower, until her fingers hovered near mine. She didn't touch me at first, she let the space linger, as though testing whether I would step back or stay. I didn't move. I couldn't. And then, slowly, deliberately, the edge of her hand grazed against mine. It wasn't much, a simple, almost accidental brush of skin, but the effect was immediate. A shiver of awareness traveled up my arm, settling heavy in my chest. I could feel the small tremor in her touch, as though she was caught in the same unsteady balance I was. The silence between us deepened, thickened, until even the faint creak of the door seemed too loud. I swallowed hard, searching for something to say, anything to break the tension, but my words failed me. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes catching mine again. There was no amusement this time, no playful tease. Just something quiet, searching, almost vulnerable. For a moment, it felt as if the entire house held its breath, waiting to see what might happen next. I wanted to close the distance, to bridge that thin line between what we both knew and what we hadn't yet dared to admit. But I hesitated, caught between the pull of the moment and the fear of crossing into something neither of us could undo. Her fingers brushed mine once more, lighter this time, almost shy, before she drew her hand back slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as if nothing had happened. But the truth was clear, something had happened. And though no words were spoken, I knew we had stepped into a new kind of silence, one filled not with comfort, but with a longing neither of us could quite name. The door was fixed. My tools were packed. By every measure, the job was done. But neither of us moved to end the afternoon. She lingered near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed lightly, eyes following me as I set my bag down by the counter. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than before. "It's such a small thing, but it means more than you think. I don't always have someone around who notices the details, who takes the time." There was something in the way she said it, not just gratitude, but a quiet admission, a glimpse of loneliness hidden beneath her easy composure. I felt it in my chest, a tug that made me want to step closer, to say something that might ease the weight she carried so gracefully. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The silence stretched, and she filled it with a faint smile. Then she pushed away from the doorway and closed the space between us. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate. She stopped just in front of me, so close I could catch the faintest trace of her perfume, mingling with the warmth of her skin. She looked up, eyes steady, searching mine as though asking a question without speaking it aloud. Then her hand lifted, tentative at first, before resting gently against my chest. It wasn't firm, not possessive, not bold. It was light, careful, almost trembling, as though she wasn't sure if she had the right to touch me in that way. But I felt the press of her palm through the thin fabric of my shirt, the warmth of her skin sinking into mine. My heart hammered beneath her touch, and I knew she could feel it. For a moment, neither of us breathed. I wanted to speak, to tell her what was building inside me, but my throat locked. Every word felt too heavy, too dangerous. And yet I couldn't step back. Not when her eyes held mine with such quiet intensity. She searched my face as though looking for permission, for some sign that I wanted this as much as she did. The air between us pulsed with the weight of everything unsaid, everything restrained. And then, she withdrew. Slowly, reluctantly, her hand slipped away, fingers trailing lightly down the front of my shirt before falling back to her side. Her eyes softened, a flicker of regret passing through them before she masked it with a faint, almost wistful smile. "Anyway," she murmured, her voice low and a little unsteady. "Thank you again. You've been more help than you know." I nodded, still unable to find words. The warmth of her touch lingered on my chest long after she stepped back, a phantom sensation I couldn't shake. The moment hadn't broken anything between us. If anything, it had carved something deeper. Something undeniable. And I knew, as I stood there with my heart still racing, that we were only one breath, one decision, away from crossing a line neither of us could ever take back. The sun had dipped lower by the time I finally gathered my tools. The once stubborn door now swung smoothly, quietly, as though nothing had ever been wrong with it. But inside me, nothing felt the same. She walked with me toward the front of the house, her steps unhurried, her presence steady at my side. There was no rush to say goodbye, no need to push the moment forward. Each step carried the quiet weight of everything that had happened, and everything that hadn't. At the doorway, I paused, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Well," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended, "that should take care of the problem." Her lips curved into that knowing smile again, the kind that made it impossible to tell whether she was amused by the words themselves or by the way I struggled to keep them ordinary. "Yes," she murmured, her tone playful yet softened by something warmer. "You've been very thorough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, delicate, full of the weight of what lingered unsaid between us. She stepped a little closer, her hand brushing lightly against my arm as though testing whether I would pull away. I didn't. Instead, I turned toward her, meeting her gaze. And in that gaze I saw the mixture she'd carried all along, confidence layered with quiet vulnerability, strength tempered by something unspoken and tender. She reached up then, slowly, giving me time to retreat if I wanted. But I didn't move. Her hand rested lightly against my cheek, warm and gentle, her fingers brushing the edge of my jaw. Before I could process the sudden rush in my chest, she leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It was brief, no more than a second, but it carried the weight of everything we had held back, everything we had nearly confessed. Her lips were warm, delicate, lingering just long enough for me to feel the steadiness of her breath against my skin. When she drew back, her hand slipped down to my arm, her fingertips trailing lightly before she let them fall away. "Don't be a stranger," she said quietly, her voice threaded with both playfulness and sincerity. I nodded, my throat tight, my chest still echoing with the imprint of her touch. "I won't," I managed, though the words barely carried the depth of what I felt. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapped around me, but the warmth she had left behind stayed. I could still feel it on my cheek, on my arm, in the rapid rhythm of my heart. I had come here expecting to fix a door. Instead, I had walked away with something else, a connection, fragile yet undeniable, that promised this wasn't the end. And though the door behind me now closed without a sound, I knew another door had quietly opened between us, one neither of us could pretend didn't exist. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances. Your support helps bring these moments to life.